let's start by playing a silent game of word association. So here's how this works. I'm going to say a word, and I want all of you to picture the first image that flashes in your mind when I say that word. No filters. Ready? The word is outsider. Let me guess. Maybe you saw someone standing alone, left out from the crowd. Something like this image right here. You pictured a deficit. All right, now let's try another word. Talent. Maybe this time you pictured a virtuoso, a specialist, someone who fits perfectly within a specific role. Well, by the end of this talk, my goal is to show you that those two things, outsider and talent, are actually the same thing. But to do that, we first need to move back about 3.5 years ago, which is when I first moved from India to the US. So picture orientation week of college. You all know how that goes. Introductions everywhere, a sea of new faces, and the singular goal of fitting in. So day after day, as I found myself in a circle full of strangers, I would say something like this. Hi, my name is Tara. I'm an aspiring music business professional, and I grew up in Mumbai, India. And usually it was around this point that someone in the circle would perk up and say, "Wow, your English is so good." Usually delivered with a tone of pleasant surprise. Now, I'd of course smile and say thank you to what was a perfectly well-meaning comment. But I'd walk away feeling just a little funny. See, I grew up in a metropolitan city. I went to an international school, and I've been around English my whole life. So it's kind of an odd feeling to be congratulated for a language you grew up speaking. It's like being told, "Hey, you walk really well." And realizing in that moment that they actually expected you to trip. Now, I know that assumptions are a necessary cognitive shortcut. It even made sense that people were using context clues to make sense of my outsider identity. But I was realizing that before I'd even had the chance to prove myself, assumptions had already been made about my abilities, my competencies, my limitations, and my cultural gaps. And I've since had this conversation with others who found themselves in similar positions, and they've all felt this kind of quiet skepticism for being an outsider. Maybe some of you here in this room have too. So to me, that first week in the US felt like a bit of a preview on what networking in the music industry would feel like. Along the way, this quiet voice crept inside my head. Hide your outsiderness. Don't give them a reason to question if you're qualified to be in the room. The Oxford Review defines code switching as the practice of adapting your communication style to fit into different contexts and different environments. And that's exactly what I did. It's not just that I swapped the word lift for elevator. No, I toned down my accent, I softened my consonants, and I became hyper-aware of the references I was making so as to not identify or prejudge myself as an outlier. One thing about people who live at cultural intersections is that we become masters at catering to whatever world we are currently in. And honestly, it kind of worked. I started to build community, and I was finally being noticed for the work I was doing in areas like music marketing, licensing, and management. And suddenly my identity wasn't part of that conversation. But while I was busy trying to fit into one world, I was ignoring the fact that I already had such a deep understanding of another. You could say that I was trying to fragment my identity, but what I was soon to realize was that my real talent lay in the intersectional sum of those identities. So I want you all to try something with me now. I want you to lift your left hand and place it on your left eye and look at me. Awesome. Now in just a second, we're gonna switch hands. So raise your other hand and swap eyes. The world shifts just a few inches when you do that. It's a slightly different perspective, but it's only when you use both eyes that you get depth perception. So those of us who live at intersections, whether it's being a musician who codes or being Indian in a US boardroom, we're forced to see through both eyes at once. And that's not a struggle, that's quite literally depth perception at play. Yeah, the ability to see a dimension of a problem that someone using just one lens can't see. And I finally saw this depth perception in action in the summer of 2024, which is when I went back to India to intern at Universal Music Group's Mumbai office. Now, I was placed in the international marketing division. I didn't even know that a specialization like this existed, where your role is quite literally to translate ideas between cultures. May 17, 2024. This was the first day of my internship, and it was also the day that Billie Eilish released her album, Hit Me Hard and Soft. And so that was how, on day one of this internship, I was pulled into helping with the Mumbai release event of Billie Eilish's album. And I remember leaving that event feeling absolutely inspired, because I realized, wow, this is the team that's bridging the gap between Billie's California-based label and her Indian fans. And perhaps my most memorable experience of that summer involves a neighborhood called Dharavi. Now, for those of you who don't know, Dharavi is one of the largest, if not the largest, informal settlement in Asia. So one day, as we were brainstorming how to bring this Kendrick Lamar release into the Indian consciousness, we asked ourselves the question, hey, what if we bring this song to Dharavi? Now, this might seem kind of random or even counterintuitive at first, but it takes someone who grew up in India to know that Dharavi is so much more than a slum. It's actually where Mumbai's hip-hop street culture lives and breathes and runs deep. And so we partnered with a local nonprofit to feature kids from this neighborhood dancing and rapping to the Kendrick track. I remember on the day of this shoot, we walked through these unpaved roads that were too narrow for the team's car to pass through. And at the end of that road, there was this school where these amazing boys aged 6 to 20 had choreographed an insane dance to Kendrick. Who knew that my first internship at a global label would lead me here? So standing there in that school that day, something in me shifted, because I realized we had taken global culture and refracted it through the lens of a local reality. And it took someone with a really specific set of experiences to be able to facilitate that. Because you had to understand American music and also Indian culture. So I remember that was my aha moment. It was the fact that what I'd tried so hard to hide, my intersectionality, was actually what gave me value in a room like this. So I want to pause on that word for a second, intersectionality. That is, the ability to have and to hold multiple overlapping identities at the same time. These identities interface and interact with each other to create an experience that's specific to you. And that right there is a unique talent. And once you start to see intersectionality as the competitive advantage that it is, you actually see it everywhere. In fact, we see the skill of depth perception in some of the most disruptive talents of our time. For example, Trevor Noah didn't just fit into American late-night television. He used his lens as a South African born during apartheid to translate American politics through a global history lens. And Virgil Abloh completely changed fashion because he looked at the sneaker through the lens of an architect and the lens of a DJ. Frans Johansson calls this the Medici effect. It's the idea that innovation happens at the intersection of diverse disciplines and cultures. In his book, Johansson argues that it's not just the fact that you can see two different perspectives. It's the fact that you're not stuck to any one of them. And therefore, by simply knowing that multiple versions of reality exist, you're more likely to think divergently and therefore to innovate. So these people that I just named, maybe they weren't successful despite being outsiders. They were successful because of it. And I remember at the end of my summer in Mumbai, I flew back to Boston with a newfound understanding of my identity and how I could add value to my industry. I stopped trying to hide the parts of me that made me feel like an outsider and rather to hone in on them. And by the time I was interviewing for my next role, I was speaking about my Indian perspective with way more pride and confidence than I ever had before. And sure enough, that next summer, I saw it happen again when I was interning at Paramount in Los Angeles. I was working with a soundtrack licensing team, but I was bringing my creative and marketing background into the room. And remember what I said about those multiple overlapping identities? Yeah, sure enough, I was also talking about my understanding of Asian fandom strategy and playlist strategy from Indian regional streaming platforms to suggest soundtrack promotion ideas that my US-based team hadn't considered yet. So in this room full of specialists, being a generalist across worlds became my advantage. And if I could give this phenomenon a name of my own, I think I would call it the outsider's edge. That is, by being on the edge of belonging, you gain a competitive edge. And I think all this talk always gets me thinking about the idea of representation, because that's of course such a buzzword today. And I think representation in the workplace often happens for optics or to fill a quota. But I ask, what about representation for capability? Because outsiders aren't just there to provide a different look. They're there to bridge, to connect, and to innovate. When you've lived between different worlds, whether it's different countries, social classes, or industries, you can see more possibilities because you can identify multiple starting points. And this isn't just about culture, let me be clear. It can be interdisciplinary. Like Brian May, the guitarist of Queen, who completed this PhD in astrophysics. He moved between the math of a melody and the math of the stars, seeing patterns that others couldn't. It can also be philosophical, like Steve Jobs, whose study of Japanese Zen Buddhism had nothing to do with hardware, but that became the foundation for Apple's minimalist design language. Homi Bhabha's third space theory of cultural hybridity suggests that when you exist between multiple realities, your realities internally negotiate with each other to create this third space in the middle. And that third space is where growth and innovation lives. So I want to leave you all today with this. In a globalized workforce, I believe we need to reframe how we define talent. A world that's only getting more and more interconnected doesn't just need people that can see through one lens. It needs people who are able to synthesize. So the next time that you feel the need to maybe sand down your identity to fit into a room, what if you don't? Because it's the things that make you feel like an outlier, the weird hobbies, the different upbringing, the nonlinear career path. Those are the identities that give you your most valuable perspective in that room. Today, if someone were to say to me, "Hey Tara, your English is so good," I would still smile and I'd still say thank you, because I know that my real talent isn't just fluency, it's fluency across cultures and across worlds. So I want us to look at that image of the outsider once again. This person isn't standing alone because they don't belong. Nope, they're standing there because they're the only one that can see with their perspective. Your identity isn't just your story, it's your talent. And that's why being an outlier is your ultimate creative superpower. Thank you.